our lives are just a sum of the decisions that we make. Like that's all they are. I mean, like some people obviously get a head start. They might be born into a better family or better circumstance than other people, but like it's like our identities aren't our circumstances or our experiences. It's how we react to those circumstances.
Welcome to the Zero Quit Podcast, where I bring you candid conversations with elite athletes, entrepreneurs, specialists, and other creatives. I'm your host, Covington, and through these dialogues, you'll hear powerful stories and practical advice that will help you live a more active and intentional life. If you enjoy the show, be sure to subscribe and share it with a friend. Mr. Miller, how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
If you guys don't already know, well, welcome to the podcast. You're listening to the Zero Quit Podcast. You probably know that by now if you clicked to play. But I'm with the inaugural guest.
Yeah.
I'm with the man of the hour, like guest on I think maybe like a 28th episode, something like that. But we're doing round 3 in person.
Round 3. I'm glad to be here. You're hosting me in your beautiful home in Colorado Springs.
Yeah.
It's been a heck of a weekend.
It's been good. We've done like a little bit of everything. It's been like a content creator or like a modern athlete's dream, right? We ate all the best spots. We did a ice barrel. We did an ultra marathon. Now we're doing a podcast. It's like the most like, cliche alpha male thing to do. So, what else would we do?
I mean, it's what we do. It's who we are.
It's
at
in
this
our
point.
nature at this point. Yeah,
it's our identity.
Yeah. So I want to kick off a little bit with what we just did yesterday. So for those who don't know, we just did the Ram Party Ultra Marathons. They have a couple of different distances, and this course happens to be basically in my backyard. It's about 30 minutes from where I live, and so I was like, man, this is really convenient because a lot of you probably, when you've done races, they're like an hour away, and it's a pain in the butt, or even further, you got to fly to it, and it just makes it difficult with packing, with extra money spent towards it, and all these different factors that come into play. So when you can do one 30 minutes away, still sleep in your bed the night before, it's pretty nice. So I signed up for this race a while ago, and I know we were talking about possibly I was going to do Bighorn with you this summer. Didn't end up doing that, but I did talk you into doing this 50K version of the 50-mile race that I signed up for. So I'm glad I ended up doing that to you. I'm still surprised you went through with it just because you've had so many marathons coming up, but I'm glad I talked you into it.
Oh, dude.
Good peer pressure.
I was definitely conflicted on whether or not I was going to do it because I did Boston 3 weeks, Boston was a month ago.
Yeah, 3 or 4. Yeah.
It's been a full 4 weeks now. And then last weekend I had the OC marathon.
Mm-hmm.
Boston was like a PR effort, so that was like that took a toll for sure.
Yeah.
So I was going 100%. So I had 3 weeks to recover, and then did OC. That one was just purely for fun.
Yeah.
So it was fun to just enjoy that one. And then, now 6 days later, did the 50K.
Did you try and hold any kind of like pace in that, or were you just kind of going like maybe a tad more than a casual pace?
Yeah, it was like,
because you still ran like a 3:20 something.
It was like 3:18. So it was like, it was more than just an easy day run.
Yeah.
But like, when you get into a race setting, if you're any kind of competitive, if you have any kind of competitiveness in you, it's hard to not push it. Like once you get around people like that. So I felt it out for the first few miles, just like didn't look at my watch, just went off a feel, and I was like, okay, this feels pretty good. So I think it was like 7:35 pace average or something. So
what was the weather contrast from Boston, which is probably still a little chilly, to California's gonna be warm now?
It was totally different. Well, actually, I mean, the temperature was relatively the same. They were both about 50 to 55, but I mean, in California, like the sun was out the whole time, so that has an effect.
Yeah.
And then in Boston, it was cloudy. We got rain for like half the race.
Yeah.
And just totally different environments altogether.
Yeah.
I mean, Boston's Boston, so.
Yeah. So we ended up doing this race yesterday, and it was funny because you landed Thursday, and I was telling you, hey, like there's been a ton of snow and a bunch of rain, and we haven't had like any rain in like a month, probably, give or take. It's pretty much sunny every day here, and we get a few, rain days. Obviously during the winter we get some snow, but we had like flood type of raining the past few days, and sure enough, we got an email like the night I think you came in. They were like changing the course and everything like that. So the course was the same. It's just we were supposed to go basically like 18 miles out. I would loop the lake. I think you would just reach the lake for the 50K version, and then come back down the mountain. So it was get all the elevation, all the incline done in the first 14, 18 miles of it, and then ride the downhill. So I was feeling pretty confident about it because I was like, man, I've trained this course for like 8 weeks now. Every Thursday, I do my long run there. I know it like the back of my hand, which gave me a lot of comfort, probably more ease into it than I should have had. Like, I still got to respect the distance and the challenge for what it was. But yeah, so, but then, like I just mentioned, they changed the course. Essentially, they just cut us off a little bit earlier. Now, what that did, though, made it a little harder in my mind because my race turned into 10 miles out, 10 down twice. So you basically do like 1 lap, 10 up, 10 down. Second lap, same deal. Third lap, you go like 4 miles out and then back, and it ended up being like just under 50 miles. And then yours was similar, except instead of doing a full second lap, you stopped basically like halfway up, turn around, and finished your like 31 miles.
Yeah, I feel like mentally that course change made it harder because you had to like you saw more of the course, so it got a little bit repetitive, and like I feel like it's just easier mentally from the original course where I was like all the way out.
I'm a big
all the way up,
out and back.
It's just easier mentally to chunk it up.
It's easier mentally to be like, okay, all I gotta do is make it back now, instead of once you get back to the finish line, you don't want to go back out.
Yeah.
Like when I came back, the funny thing, because we have that third lap, when I came back, I don't know if you remember this, the guy was handing me a medal.
Yeah.
And I was like, no, dude, I'm not done yet.
I got 10 more miles.
I got 10 more miles. And I was like, I wish, so it just really sucked. And when I was heading back out, I was like, man, I didn't actually think I should have done it, but I was like, it would have been nice to just be like, thanks for the medal and just be done.
Strava would have known though.
Yeah. But it's just tough mentally to go like back out. And it's just, and then, handling on more incline on your legs is pretty tough. But I'll give a quick synopsis about how my race went, and then I'd love to hear yours. I mean, we basically shared the first 25 miles together, but the first lap that we did, you kind of trusted my experience with it because I knew generally like what sections we should probably hike and which ones we should run because I know what's coming up and what's around the corner. So we did like, some run walk, or hike run, whatever you want to call it, up the first 10 miles. And then coming down, we pretty much ran all 10 miles. I think, besides stopping at an aid station or like having a gel or a pee break or something like that, zoomed down the mountain and ended up, I think when we entered the aid station, so we had like 20 miles, like a 3:39 was like our total thing.
It's just under 4 hours, I believe.
Yeah. And we spent a little bit of time at that aid station just because get some food, bathroom breaks, and so forth, and got back out there. But around that time, I started to trend a little bit downwards. My body didn't feel too bad at all. Like my muscles weren't sore. I wasn't really too fatigued. But as I explained to you a ton, like after the race, my lungs were just getting really tired. And this is something I've experienced in other ultras, specifically my last 50K I did 3 weeks ago, where it just feels like my lungs aren't operating at 100%. They're operating like 50 or 60%, where, I'm just not getting as much oxygen in. If I try and take a full breath, I kind of get that like cough reflex. And anytime I would try and run longer than maybe like a half mile in a row, my heart rate would just get up so fast and I would just get really like winded and tired.
Do you think it's the elevation?
Well, you've referenced it a couple times. We talked about it. It doesn't feel like a thinness elevation, like, oh, the air feels real thin. Because obviously I live here. I live at this elevation, and I know the experience of like what that altitude difference feels like. It doesn't feel that way. It really just feels like an internal, like my lungs are just tired. And it typically has kicked in around like 6-7 hours of physical activity. So like once I pass that, 30 mile or get close to that 30 mile threshold and I'm like 6-7 hours into a race, that's when it tends to be like, oh, my lungs they're getting there. But that ended up causing me to hike most of it. So you were kind of taking the lead a bit on that second lap. And luckily I didn't hold you too back because about halfway, you end up turning around anyway for your course. But eventually I got up to the top of the mountain. I was just telling myself like, hey, I'm hiking more of this than I would like to, but this is only my second, in the last long lap I have to do here. Let me just get to the top. And as long as I can run downhill for most of it, I'll make up time. I'll do good. And then I just have like 10 miles. And that actually played out pretty well. I was, as people were passing, I was, they do the whole good job thing. And all the people running downhill, I'd say something funny like, man, I'm jealous of you. Or I'd be like, man, the downhill seems pretty nice, And I was like, I should try some of that. And eventually was able to try it. Came down the mountain, was able to run probably like 80% of it. So my lungs still weren't feeling great, but they didn't feel too bad on the downhill. So I was able to run most of that. got to the bottom. And this is where I last saw you and my wife Maddie, and I think both of you said I like looked pretty good. I was like 40 miles in, didn't feel too bad. Lungs were still bothering me, but I was like, 10 miles left. As long as I can run that downhill 4 miles back, I'll do pretty good. But this is where my lungs kind of just pooped out. The last 10 miles were extremely miserable. Again, my body, my muscles weren't too bad, but it was just my lungs were not allowing me to run any of it. And even the incline walks hurt way worse than running downhill. So it's like, think of it, how walking up an incline hurts way more than just running downhill. So it was just kind of strange in that way. But so I walked up basically for the 4 miles, got to that last aid station, which was the turnaround for the 50 miler on that last lap, came down, wasn't able to run much of it. But eventually saw you around like 0.8 miles maybe away from the finish. And I got a text from my wife that, kind of picked up my spirits. It was like, hey, you're real close to finishing sub 11 hours. Get this done. And I don't know, kind of just like got a little surge of energy. I was like, all right, we're here. This is the last stretch. Finish up. You can get your rest soon enough, get your ice cream, and power it through. So that's like a rough recap of the race. But how did you experience it, and specifically kind of that last part when you turned around? I know you turned on the jets.
Yeah, a little bit. No, I mean, you kind of went through the first 25 miles. It was super nice to have you like kind of, all right, we should walk this part because there's like a little bit flatter part coming up so we can run, and just like knowing
there's plenty of people that didn't know.
Yeah, and then eventually pass those people later on, probably because they ran at the wrong parts or ran a little bit too much on the incline, because it was, I mean, the first 10 miles were steady, like 10% grade basically.
It's funny, none of it is so steep that you need poles really, or that you're really like pushing your knees, and none of it's, really bad. It's just consistent. There's no flats really, and there's no declines. It's just up for 10 miles, like you said, around like an 8 to 12% grade.
The nice thing about that course though was it wasn't technical at all. Like it was just on that like dirt road,
wide dirt
basically.
path.
So it was like you didn't really have to think too much. You could just kind of put your head down and just grind. So that made it a lot easier. Again, mentally, I think made it easier. But yeah, I mean, the first 25 miles up until we split, like I felt pretty good. I felt similar to how I felt like, mile 20, 25 of a marathon. And like we kind of talked about it while we were out there running. And I experienced this when I did Bighorn 50 last year. But there comes a point, it's typically around like the 2 hour to 3 hour mark, where like your legs get the lactic acid in there. Like they feel kind of like bricks. They're fatigued. Your whole body is like starting to feel it. But for me, at least in my experience, as soon as that starts to set in, say it's like a 6 or 7 out of 10 on the pain scale, like from there to the end of the race, it never really gets worse for me. Like
just settles in.
It just settles in, and then it persists at that same level. And so that's something I've come to realize with these longer events, like anything, more than like a half marathon or marathon, is like once that pain sets in, it's there. So then it becomes a game of how long can you endure that same pain? Because I think if it's not really going to get much worse. It's just gonna be there.
And the more races you do, whether they're marathons or ultras, you start to get a feel of these common themes that happen, right? And you start to recognize how you should personally react and what you should expect. Like, for example, in ultras, there's these waves of feeling amazing, like we were coming down the mountain, crushing it, cruising, ripping like, sub 9, minute per mile paces. But then I know there's going to be down patches. And when I get in those down patches, at that moment, I think, oh, it's all downhill from here. Like, it's just going to get worse and worse. But I have the memory to know, no, one, it's just going to kind of stay like this. And two, you're going to have another up, moment. You're going to have another moment where you kind of get a surge of energy, feel better, and things like that. So it's just having that understanding of the different phases that occur within a race gives you a lot of confidence, and especially when you're in those dark moments, like, hey, things will get better, although they seem like, the end, things will get better. So that was a little bit of me too. Like, again, I knew I was like, okay, well, eventually I try and just keep it simple and be like, look, it's a matter of time. As long as I just keep putting my feet one foot in front of the other, even if it's slow, I'll eventually get to the finish line. So it's just a little bit of that mindset, and knowing like, well, I'm not going to quit, so all I can do is just keep moving forward and get it done.
Yeah, it's that relentless forward progress. Is that's the key to these races. And I mean, I feel like I got like a good kick of energy when we were going back up the mountain, and that's where like I was just like got into a groove with the
you
power
felt
hiking.
good. I felt meh.
I felt good, but I think the reason I felt so good is because I knew I was like, okay, I only have a couple miles left of climbing. I can get to this 25-mile mark, and then it's just all downhill. So that was like a good boost. But I think that shows you how mental all this stuff is.
It's
like,
very mental. You have to visualize and think about these checkpoints. And yours was, let me get to this little turnaround, and then I can just zoom down.
Yeah.
And mine was around that time, let me get to the top of the mountain, and then I can turn down and turn on the jets. Oh. So you have to break into these little milestones. Unfortunately, because of the way that the course was redone, there's a lot of little checkpoints because it was like here to here to here, then back out, and all of that. One thing I do want to bring up, I was just thinking about as we were talking about it, was the difference of running a race solo versus with someone.
I was just gonna talk about that.
Yeah, because I've never had someone else running the race with me. You meet some people along the way out there, and you share some miles with people. But I thought that was really helpful yesterday, just to have someone to kind of, I don't know, like again, we talked about it, like pick me up when I'm moving a little slower, and I don't know if I picked you up any slow moments, but giving you some cues on, hey, let's walk this section, maybe slowing you down so that you have more energy later is a help in that way. But I definitely enjoyed it, and it helped pass the time better, made those first 25 miles go a lot faster.
Yeah, I think I'm glad we got to share miles together, and it definitely made it go by faster because you're kind of just distracted. Yeah, it's similar like listening to music or something. You kind of can remove yourself and not think about how bad your legs hurt or whatever. But I'm also glad that it came to a point where we were able to split and be on our own, just because like you don't really sign up for these things expecting to feel good. Like you want to get something out of it, and you want to grow, and
you want to have those solitude moments. The solitary moments where you can kind of just feel the suffering, feel the moment, the good and the bad. And you do need those, alone moments. Yeah,
that was like the last 5 miles going down for me. I was like, got into like a good groove. And that's what you realize, like I started to think about how bad my legs hurt and how bad everything hurt. But you can kind of get in that little pain cave, which it's harder to get there when you're with somebody, I feel like.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's my experience, at least. So it's a good balance of both.
It's interesting because I have seen, I'm sure you have on your, maybe in Bighorn, I see some people that'll run something together, or it's them and their friend, or sometimes it's a spouse. And I've never, I don't know, I just wondered how that dynamic worked, especially if, God forbid, I mean, I was slowing down, but, God forbid I was like checking out and I was having a really hard time, and you were like, gosh, like these guys are really dragging me down like an anchor, I wouldn't want to be that either.
At that point, I was kind of trying to do like the carrot and the stick with you. I was like, okay, maybe use it as a carrot, like to lead a little bit.
You definitely got me running some extra sections that I wasn't, and it worked out. It worked out for the best, but it was a good race overall. Good weather, enjoyed it.
Oh, the weather was
got a lot out of it.
Absolutely perfect.
Yeah, but it is one of those things where maybe this is something we can riff off too a little bit, is the time commitment with a lot of these races, whether it is marathons or anything. It's just such a big. It's not just I'm committing a whole day and some weeks training for this, but like each workout, it's a big sacrifice, especially if you have other work obligations, family obligations. I know that was some of the questions we got related to, is how do you balance all this stuff? And the truth is, like, you just kind of make it up as you go. You squeeze time in when you can. If you have to work a 9-to-5 job or some kind of schedule that's somewhat close to that, and you have family time in the evening, you might have to just get up really early and crank out a 90-minute run, fasted or with not much in the tank, and you just kind of squeeze stuff around your schedule. And that's what I've had to do a good bit. I'm sure you've had to do that a good bit. And it's tough with endurance specifically, because lifting, progressive overload looks like heavier weight, more reps, more sets. But the workout's still like an hour and a half. Mm-hmm. Endurance, you do have to get those long runs longer, and those speed workouts longer. The tempo runs start to get lengthened. The mileage gets higher. The hours per week gets longer. So it becomes a huge, thing to take on.
Yeah, if it's a priority to you, I think no matter what it is, whether it's running or lifting or your work or your kids, whatever, if it really is a priority, like you'll find a way to make it happen no matter what. And that's the thing with these, like running used to be such a grind. Like it was a thing I'd have to really talk myself into doing every single time I went out for a run. And then now it's like I look forward to it almost.
Yeah.
But so it's just become like a non-negotiable too. Like, and that's when, whether it's you sign up for like a 5K or a 100 miler, once you commit to something, I feel like you're gonna most of the time like you're gonna put in the work and the steps to get there, because especially if you've failed at something before,
you
know how that
fail again.
Like it's in my opinion, it's worse to fail than it is to like I'd rather or what is that saying of like it's
hate to fail rather than love to win.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And so like even if you miss a goal time by a little bit or something, like I'd rather do that than just like completely bonk, obviously. But
but one thing I've thought about as this race has come closer is the idea of how important it is to kind of set these goals. Not even if you want to set these goals. Like what I mean by that is you almost need these races to hold you accountable, because otherwise I wouldn't be running 8-hour weeks, like even like right now, I probably am going to do another ultra in the fall, but right now I don't have anything on the books. And so for that reason, like you said, why do I need to go run 6 miles or why do I need to go out on a 2-hour long run? Like I don't have that reason. But when you sign up for something, even if you're not, super stoked about it, I mean, obviously you want to sign up for things you're stoked about and there's benefit to it. But when you set these goals for yourself or these checkpoints, it doesn't even have to be an official race. It could just be something you do personally, a fun adventure, you do a fun hike or something like that. But when you set these, you do have to do the work so that when that day comes, you don't bonk, you don't shit the bed. It's something I talked about a little bit on a few podcasts ago with bodybuilding is one of those sports where if you don't do the work, you have to still get on stage on that day and you're going to look like shit. Like if you slacked off on your diet, you skipped on the cardio, you're going to look tubby on there. And you're going to be in front of everybody with all those lights on you in a thong, or short compressions. And you're going to have to show your physique. So there's that pressure, right? Like I don't want to go out there yesterday and can be completely out of shape. And then people will be like, what happened? Brock DNF'd, And it's like, well, I didn't do the work, So it's just nice to have that kind of accountability of a certain deadline, date, goal, race, meet, whatever, just to kind of keep you pushing yourself. Because otherwise it's easy to be like, let me just do enough, just stay stagnant.
That's where I think these races can get really addicting too. And like you can just keep signing up for race after race. Is like you kind of need the accountability. And but then once you have that race set, even if it's like 6 months down the road, then it's like every single day you still got to show up and put in the work. But going back to like the time commitment and the, like trying to make time for things, like I think something always has to give in some regard. And hopefully it's, the bad habits like watching TV or spending too much time on your phone or like, just spend too much time not being productive. And so it's like, now couldn't tell you the last time I watched TV. Like sat down and watched a Netflix series. Like I
was talking to you last night how like the only sport I keep up with is MMA, and the good and bad thing is it's only one night a week, and it's sometimes not even weekly, and it's Saturday nights. It's like usually later in the day, so even on that day I'm still working in that morning. So the idea is, what I'm getting at is, I don't watch TV, I don't do these different things. It's not just about me, but just for an example, a lot of people, and I'm sure we could still find time we waste in our day scrolling on reels or something, like you get caught up in it. But so many people act like, it's easy for us because we have, either, work from home or entrepreneurs, we can make our schedule. Okay, it helps. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of times where people just do not recognize or not honest with themselves about all the time they waste. It's, you talk to someone, they're like, oh yeah, we're watching these 3 different shows right now. And I'm like, you have time to watch 3 shows? Like Maddie and I, because she works later, we watch like 2 episodes a week, of a show or 2 different shows. And it's hard to even fit that in sometimes because things come up, appointments come up, and so forth. And so you just have to be honest, like, what can I cut out? Like, is this race and my health more important to me than this Netflix show? Is my awareness of current pop culture events or this late night playoff basketball game more important than me getting in 8 hours of sleep or getting up early to do this workout or fit this in? So you really just have to be honest with yourself about the time you're wasting, take steps to cut out those things and, deal with it and obviously replace that time with the effective things. And then when these, races happen and we go past them, like I'm sure you're going to get home, and this week I'm not going to run really, but maybe 1 or 2 days, I have all this now free time that I'm like, man, but I'm going to try and stop myself from stuffing it with bullshit, and actually still keep it productive time, whether that be like reading or more work or something like that. But it's tough.
I think one of my biggest pet peeves is when people say they don't have time for something.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I would work out, but I just don't have time.
What's the one that people say?
I can't stand that.
they go like, you say, oh, everyone has 24 hours in a day. And they go, well, not really, because I have these kids and take them to daycare. And it's like one, objectively, no, we all do have 24 hours in a day. Mm-hmm. But yes, you have different obligations. Some of them you choose, some of them you don't, right? Like, your kids do have to do these things. You didn't choose for them to have these, rec sports or whatever. You have to drop them off. Like, these things happen. But there's always, like, a way to work around it. I just hate the idea and the mindset of, because something is harder to do, I'm just not going to try and do it at all.
Yeah.
And you get that all the time with, I can't lose weight because I'm older, my metabolism's slow. It's like, just because you're older, it's harder to lose weight. Doesn't mean you can't do it. Doesn't mean that you shouldn't do the harder work to achieve the result.
Yeah, I think going off of the choices that you choose to do things.
Yeah,
that's something I've really started to understand lately. Is like our lives are just a sum of the decisions that we make.
Yeah,
like that's all they are. I mean, like some people obviously get a head start. They might be born into a better family or better circumstance than other people. But like it's like our identities aren't our circumstances or our experiences. It's how we react to those circumstances and things that happen to us. And like you could, like David Goggins, for example, like absolute shit childhood, all this stuff. And then, but he took it and he flipped it and turned it into like a successful life. And like so many people, there's so many stories of that.
People either view themselves as a victim of their circumstances or a master of their actions, like a master of their own life and their decisions, and they feel like they're have that control over themselves.
Yeah, it's easy to blame like your parents or your friends or the hometown you grew up in, whatever.
And it's not to say that those don't have an impact, but it's just they aren't the final determinant, factor.
Yeah.
Like you can still make do, and we see these cases all the time, and it's just, we could go on all the time, but it's just typically the people that complain about that or will comment on, one of our posts or something like that. You go to their situation, they're not in the most dire, crazy circumstance they can't carve themselves out of. Usually it's self-defeating behavior and self-defeating choices that they've made, and they're just shifting that frustration and that blame on social media, which you see all the time. Like, what is commenting on my page or criticizing someone else's lifestyle do for you?
Yeah, and I think so much of it too is just the people that you spend time with, the people that you surround yourself with, which again is a choice. Like, I think people, like I was like this in high school. I was like, oh, these are my friends and they'll always be my friends. Like I didn't make this choice. It just kind of happened. But no, it's like you choose to text them back. You choose to call them or answer their call or go hang out with them. And like everything for the most part is just a choice. And like we have the power to make those decisions and dictate whatever we want our lives to look like.
Yeah. To kind of round out this podcast, I do want to bring up and answer some of the questions that we got last night on Instagram. We put up a little story just to kind of mix things up, answer some questions, and so forth. So I'll kick us off with one of these that I got. And it is, the idea of if you don't live near the mountains or trails, which is a little bit of kind of what you experience. You have some trails local, but you don't have much elevation. How do you train for an ultra marathon when you don't have some of those modalities?
Yeah, that's a good question. So yeah, in Texas, obviously very flat. We do have some single track trails, so you can get some trail experience. So like if you have any kind of trails, no matter the elevation, I think
use them, right?
Getting on the trails, just because it's obviously very different from road running. And the other thing I would recommend, we were talking about this during the race yesterday, was the incline treadmill versus the Stairmaster. And I think we both agreed that the incline treadmill has a better simulation of uphill hiking. And I know what a lot of people do is they'll do like a treadmill workout where they'll like run flat for, to kind of simulate the flats and downhills. They'll run flat for like 5-10 minutes, and then they'll do like 5 minutes of incline walking, and you can kind of just do intervals of that. I actually didn't do any of that for this race just because I was like in marathon mode. But now I have another 50 miler in 5 weeks, so I'm probably gonna do a little bit more of that kind of stuff.
I'd say you want to look at specificity, and again, if you have trails close by, use them when you can, because again, getting used to the dirt, breaking in your trail shoes, getting used to hopping over some roots and rocks, I think that's very valuable. But as far as the elevation and prepping for that, I think utilizing the treadmill, like we talked about, incline treadmill is gonna be a lot more better way to simulate walking up an incline rather than a Stairmaster. You're not really doing that same motion. Your body isn't working that same motion. You're working those same muscles, but not in the same kind of motor patterns that you are when you're regularly hiking up an uphill. So what I would do is look at the course that you're running, Figure out how much elevation you're getting per mile. And then on the treadmill, you kind of want to try and simulate that. So let's say per mile, you're getting 300 feet of elevation. So try and set it up to where maybe you run for 2 minutes, then you're getting in like 200 feet, at a 10% grade. Then you run flat again, you finish off that. So you're basically trying to simulate how much elevation you're going to be feeling, what those grades look like, all kind of at the same time within the same run on a treadmill. And that's, there are people that have trained for things like Leadville or these different trail races purely on treadmills. Mm-hmm. It's not ideal, but that's an important thing. And at the end of the day, just having great fitness will prepare you. You haven't been on a lot of elevation. We just did, I think you still got, 4,000 and some change? Mm-hmm. And you were fine. And that's just because you have great fitness and conditioning. You've worked your body up to that. So the first and foremost thing is just be very fit. Yep. And then as far as preparing your muscles for it, some strength training helps, but specifically the incline treadmill, I think.
Yeah, I think one thing to add too, which I don't have a good answer for it, but like to actually acclimate yourself to that higher elevation. As far as I know, there's not a lot you can do. I've seen people wear the masks and stuff like that.
I think the best thing to do is like, when people try and sleep in some type of chamber.
Yeah.
But even that, I wouldn't stress it too much.
Yeah.
If you can get out there earlier to acclimate, do it, but it is what it is.
I believe it takes a couple weeks, so you can't show up 5 days before and expect to acclimate.
It'd probably take a full week,
Yeah. Yeah, that's a tough one, though. You want me to hit a question?
What questions you got?
How you two met?
Well, I was at a coffee shop, and Jeremy's liked my hair. No, we met basically through Instagram. So I actually answered this to somebody asked me, I think the other day.
Technically, we just met about 2 days ago.
Yeah, in person, we just met 2 days ago, which it's always fun meeting people, you've communicated with back and forth for like a year and never met them in person. So I told you it was a little bit like a catfish moment, is he going to be different how I perceive him? But no, the story is I'm pretty sure I just found your documentary on YouTube, Chasing 400. I think it had been out for maybe a month or two at the time. And I was like, man, this is like really well made. I love these ultra documentaries. And I commented, and then I found your Instagram and messaged you. And, because with my editing background and filmmaking, not experience, but I understand the process through the work that I do. I was like, man, massive props. You made a really good job. Like, this was awesome, blah, blah, blah.
I actually don't even remember this.
Yeah, but I followed you. You followed me back. I think we had a little small exchange. And then later, when it came time to start my podcast back in last July, I'd moved out to Colorado. I was like, I'd love to have you on, ask you about the film, the other things you're doing, and so forth. I think at the time you were preparing to run a sub 3. I think that was for the Oregon Marathon and so forth. And so that's kind of how we kind of met originally. And then I think we just got closer the last 4 or 5 months and different projects we're working on that we'll announce in the future. But it's kind of just, again, and obviously like to get your take on it, but just meeting like-minded people. And the biggest thing with me, because I'm sure you're this way too, I've met a lot of people through Instagram in real life in Denver and all these things like that. And the biggest thing is I just want to meet real, genuine people. A lot of people can put up a front or put up a personality or act way more energetic or way funnier on Instagram. Then you meet them in person and they're a little self-absorbed, or they're on their phone all the time, or they're a little awkward. And just meeting someone and having instant chemistry and being able to talk about things beyond singular topics, having more common interests, makes it really easy to just resonate with somebody and kind of grow a relationship that way.
Yeah, I think that's something I really try to be conscious of personally, of now that I've got, people following me on Instagram or whatever, and then now I'm meeting more and more of them in person, that's the worst case scenario is they expect something from the person that you seem to be on the internet, and then you're just totally different in person. And so I really try to be conscious of that, to not oversell myself online and then not, underplay it in person, and just be myself as much as I can, no matter what I'm doing or where I'm at. I definitely try to be conscious of that. But I think, internet friends, that's the power of the internet now, is we live, thousands of miles away from each other, or however far it is from Texas to Colorado. And I feel like I've known you for years basically, because of voice messages and video calls and whatnot. And now when we meet up in person for the first time, it's there's not that weird kind of ice breaking thing.
It kind of just picks up, kind of immediately. And that is the power of, I feel like there's levels to it. A few comments is one thing, a few DMs, you kind of get to know someone a little bit better. Voice messages is great. You're a big voice message guy. I mean, I like him a lot too.
I'll rip the voice
and
messages.
then, you start having some Google Meets or podcasts or FaceTimes, things like that. You really get to know someone on a deeper level and so forth.
Yeah. Should we hit another question?
Go for it.
Let's see. How do you prevent or treat foot blisters? This was something.
You ever dealt with those? I haven't dealt with them much.
Not really. More so, like my toes will just get wrecked from like crammed into the front of shoes. But yesterday I actually tested out it was like the Exoskin toe socks. I've been talking about them all weekend because I'm a big fan of them now, especially after yesterday. But I had a friend, Justin Kinner. He's the guy that we did the documentary on a couple years ago. But he recommended the Exoskin wool toe socks because after my 50-miler last year, I was like, I got to figure out my foot situation for these ultras. And so my feet felt fantastic. Like they had zero issues yesterday. So the toe socks with I put chafe cream, like Sport Shield, all over my toes and zero issues.
Yeah, what
there.
I've heard is anytime you can kind of lube up your toes helps a lot with any kind of friction and just trying to prevent. I think the biggest thing is preventative measures, right? So try and stop them before they can have some good fitting shoes, wearing socks that aren't too are going to create irritation, utilizing again any kind of nut butter or lube or whatever, and then if you do have issues, I think there's different athletic tapes you can use to try and help prevent them from being painful. But
keeping your feet healthy, that's like one of the biggest challenges to ultra. So you can get that figured out. That's a win. Here's a good one. What is your advice to new runners? Do you want me to answer this one or you?
You go for it.
Okay. New advice to new runners. Two things is be consistent and be patient.
Mm-hmm.
I think that 99% of running injuries typically come from overuse, and that's probably the biggest hurdle that new runners have to overcome is preventing those injuries. And so, I went through all this, so I can speak from experience. Is like you can't look at somebody who's been running for 5 or 10 years and be like, oh, they're running 50, 60 miles a week. I can go out and do that. Like you have to start at like 10 miles a week for a couple months even, and then slowly work up to like 15 miles a week and then 20 and just do it very, very slowly. And that's where the patience comes in. But then also the consistency and knowing that it's a long game. Like it takes years and years of like a lot of zone 2 training, a lot of time spent on your feet, because the way I look at running, it's a high impact single leg activity. And when else throughout your life are you ever doing a high impact single leg activity? And so people, they're like 30 years old, they never really ran before, and they just go out and try and run 30 miles a week. Like, of course you're going to get injured. So if you can get through like the first year of that and just be patient with it, then that's where you can start building up, I think, and just give your body time to work into it.
Yeah, my 2 points would be start slow, and both kind of how you mentioned, slowly working up the mileage, but then also, a lot of people, myself included, they come from not running at all, really, and they view running as this thing that just is like suffering, it's awful, and it can be that way, but your easy run should be casual. You should be able to kind of have a talking pace, and not every run should be hard and really difficult. You're still moving your legs, you're still sweating, but basically what I'm getting at is, a lot of the running time you spent shouldn't be that strenuous.
It should be boring.
Yeah, and then the other thing is to not compare yourself too much. Don't look at other people's Strava splits and different people's paces and be like, I want to run that now, or I can run that, and don't worry about your comparison, because one person's progress within a year is going to be very different than yours. I look at some people and I'm like, man, even Pierce, right? He just started running ultras. He's already running like a bunch of hundreds. And some people have a much better ability to adapt to some of this training a lot faster. And then also a lot of people have, track or cross country or different endurance sports, soccer backgrounds that allow, they have this base built. And if you're like me and you have no endurance base built, or just genetically, you just might not adapt as much, or you're not following the same program. There's a lot of factors. You can't expect the exact same results at the exact same time. So it's important to keep that in mind.
Yeah. Beautiful. Who can bench more after a race?
I think before and after would be me.
Yeah, I'll give that one to you.
But that's not that fair. I have like 4 years lifted on you.
Okay, I'll give that one to you. Let's see. What would you tell someone who wants to get into ultra running, a newbie to marathons, as somebody who's a newbie to marathons?
Oh.
Similar points, I feel like, of like just kind of do everything in increments, like maybe start with a half marathon and then move up to a marathon.
I'd say the one thing that comes to my mind is just recognize it's like a different sport. because it's going to involve, as much as, we were trying to joke about people, you get the smart asses that say, oh, it's just a bunch of walking.
Yeah.
But when you enter a trail race rather than a road race, the elevation, the distance, all these factors, unless you're elite, you're not going to run 50 miles straight.
Yeah.
You're not going to run even like 30 miles straight. Like, you're going to have sections where you hike and sections where you might, take a little walk break. You have these aid stations. It's very different where road racing is kind of go. Start to finish. You're not really stopping for anything. You're ideally just moving. And, so recognize that you might have to wear a pack. You might have to have these different flasks and different elements of food. So just recognize the different factors. There's obviously a lot of overlap. There's more overlap than not, but just recognize those things.
Yeah, I think that they're definitely two different sports. They require different mindsets. I feel like road running is way more about your time and paces and all these different things. And then trail running is obviously more about just finishing most of the time,
a lot of times,
and really just enjoying it. I find trail running is a lot more enjoyable.
Yeah.
But road running kind of scratches that like competitive itch that you get because it's fun to go fast at the same time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, running on the road where it's relatively flat, you're kind of doing the same movements and the same muscle groups repetitively. So just totally different sports in general. So just kind of going into it that mindset.
Yeah.
Let's see.
If we got a good one.
Okay. Well, going into a sauna improve your running? I mean, we're not scientists on this.
No, but I don't know directly, but
there is a cardio effect.
Yeah, one thing I will say is shout out to Jason Coop. He's a ultra running coach. He's actually in Colorado Springs as well, but he has a great book and great podcast that touches on sauna with running as far as acclimation. So a lot of people, are worried trying to go into bad water, a really hot race, and they're like, how do I acclimate for that heat? How do I get used to that heat? And there are some different protocols you can do at like a commercial gym that has a sauna, some certain times a day where as long as you're just getting in, I think like, a couple times a week, like 10, 15 minutes in the sauna, you can kind of start to prepare those reactions with your body to that heat. It's going to be way more effective than trying to do, I don't know if you've heard some of the crazy stories people do with bad water, where they go in their room, they get the dryer on, they get heat fans and everything while they're on a treadmill and wear sweatshirts and all these things to try and feel real hot. But anyway, that's maybe the only reference I'll mention on that question.
Yeah, the sauna, I think it's more of like a cellular level where you can kind of shift that. I was listening to Huberman talk about it, where like it actually happens relatively quickly with your nervous system. Mm-hmm. That's what you're changing the most. And your body can actually acclimate pretty quickly to that. I don't remember the exact number. I think it was within like a couple of weeks, actually. Yeah. But the other thing too, I think it was Dr. Rhonda Patrick, I heard her talk about this, where 20 minutes in the sauna is equivalent to 20 minutes on a stationary bike because it elevates your heart rate. So like you get the same, it's like low zone 2, high zone 1 aerobic effect just by sitting there because it spikes your heart rate. Over time, that's probably going to not have as big of an effect. Yeah. But I love the sauna. I'm a big fan of it. Yeah. Should you like 2 more questions?
Yeah.
All right. How did you run an ultra 6 days after a marathon?
That's only for you.
This is for me. I mean, a couple years ago, I never would have thought I could do that. But again, just through the consistency and the patience of consistently training and like doing
your body's adapted
like
to it,
back-to-back long runs, like like one weekend I'll do like 20 miles, next weekend I'll have like 18 or something. And so
and I think something that I want to underscore here too is nutrition and sleep. Mm-hmm. You really dialed in your sleep after those races, so you get 6 days in between the races, and you really, I mean, I see you pounding coconut water and whole foods and high protein, and as long as you're taking those factors are way more important than a cold plunge, way more important than a sauna. Is getting in the right diet, both for fueling and recovery purposes, and also sleep is like the number one.
Yeah, the biggest thing, like even this morning, like anytime I have a race or a big workout of any kind, I'll try and sleep. I'll just let my body go as long as possible. So I think last night I got like over 8.5 hours. Yeah. While you're up at like 5 a.m.
Yeah, but, I'm a little stupid. That's the problem.
But I mean, sleep more than anything, I think is the most important thing for recovery.
Yeah.
All right, this is for both of us.
All right.
100K or 100 miler anytime in the future?
It'd be 100K before it'd be 100 miler. I can tell you that much. I think 100K is what, 62?
Yeah.
My only thing holding me back from wanting to do like anything longer right now is I need to see my lungs hold up better on 50 miles. Because so far I've done 250 miles and I finished, and this one I shaved off like 3.5 hours from my last time. But I just need to see myself have a stronger finish.
Yeah.
Could I make it through another 12? Yeah, probably. But I need to see more for myself before I agree to something like that.
Man, that was basically the same answer I told Pierce when he asked me. He's like, "Why haven't you done 100 yet?" And I'm like, "I want to finish a 50 or 100K
and feel better
and feel okay." Because after my 50 last year, I could barely walk, like I could barely move. But we were kind of talking about it yesterday. Like, once you commit to something, like say you commit to a 100-miler and you have it in your head, okay, tomorrow I'm running 100 miles, or like all during your training block I'm running 100 miles. It's like a mental shift that happens to where like you're out there during the race, during the 100-miler, you hit mile 50, you're like, okay, we're halfway there. As opposed to like when you do a 50, you hit mile 25 and like, okay, we're halfway there.
The
so
goalposts get changed.
Yeah, you change the finish line, and then therefore mentally you have different expectations. Basically the same answer for me. I think 2024 is going to be the year of the 100-miler for me.
It's definitely not this year. Potentially the next year. It really depends. I honestly want to get back to some heavier weight training. It's been a little while for me personally, so get a little more into that. Get back to some heavier squats and deadlifts. I know we did a little deadlifts before the race and so forth. So
it's hard to beat the lifting. But I think again for me, it's more so just like spending a little bit more time building some endurance.
I need a longer base building period. Yeah, because this past one I was a little nervous because I'm still just from that IT band injury, which I haven't had in over a year. It just sticks in your head. You know, you have injuries. It just still makes you nervous that, hey, if I push a little too hard, this is gonna come up. But I'd need to build 60, 70-mile weeks basically before I could try and do something like that.
Yeah, and it just takes time too.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I've been running for about 5 years, a little less than 5 years now. And so it's not a lot of time really.
Yeah, I'm just 3.
3 years, yeah. So it's just time more than anything, letting your body acclimate. Like each time I do one of these big events, like I feel light years better. I know it's only a 50K compared to the 50-miler, but I was wrecked. I didn't run for weeks after my 50-miler. I feel like I could go run today if I had to.
Yeah, I think you'll do better this year in the Bighorn.
It just takes time to build up the base and let your body acclimate.
Yeah, well, I enjoy this. We're going to take you to the airport.
Yeah.
Where do you want people to find you at? Plug your stuff.
Yeah, let's do Instagram, just Jeremy Miller.
Website. It's got weird stuff, but I'll put the username spelled out in the
there's a little dot before the R on Miller. There's not many Jeremy Millers out there that create content, surprisingly.
Yeah.
Very common name though. But then website is jeremymiller.io. YouTube is just at Jeremy Miller. So
man's doing a lot of things.
We're doing a lot of things. We're trying to figure it out.
Exactly. Well, if you guys enjoyed this podcast, please share it. Obviously, follow Jeremy and subscribe to the podcast if you want more stuff like this. We'll catch you guys in the next one.
Thanks for having me on.